Stop sitting around making your video. Dude, gotta make it. I'm telling you. Ow!
Man, making videos for YouTube is the easiest task in the world. If only playing games was that easy.
Jason!
With Telltale just having released the first episode of their latest game series, Game of Thrones, the old debate sprouts throughout the internet. Is this still a game? Telltale has moved away from classic point-and-click adventures and shifted towards more narrative-focused experiences. It feels a lot more like playing an interactive movie than playing a game to many people, and although these titles have acquired quite a huge fan base, they also receive a lot of criticism at the same time, especially for not being a real game. Now, I respect that these kinds of interactive experiences do not suit every kind of player, but when someone starts a discussion with the question if something qualifies as a game or not, he is asking the wrong question. Today we're gonna talk about quote-unquote games that are no games. Telltale's latest adventures aren't the only games that lots of people really enjoyed that got criticized for not being a real game. Dear Esther makes you wander around a beautiful Hebridean island and uncover what the developers call an interactive ghost story. All the player does is walk and listen to fragments of narrated text that get triggered by simply moving to different parts of the environment. No combat, no killing, no action, no mechanical puzzles, just walking, watching, listening, and trying to combine the scattered story fragments of a mysterious life tragedy in the player's mind. To the Moon is a game where you explore the memories of a dying man to fulfill his dying wish. The appeal doesn't lie in fighting monsters or leveling up your character, but in putting together the mystery of a life that didn't go quite in the right direction and to find the reasons what went wrong. It deals with very mature and emotional topics like personal loss and trauma and even autism to a certain degree. Gone Home is another example of a game that polarized the opinions of players and critics alike. You play a young woman that comes back home to visit her parents after many years of living abroad, and you find the house deserted, and by reading letters, diary entries and listening to tape recordings, you uncover the story of a family that drifted apart from each other and learn the very intimate story and reasons of your younger sister that ran away from home. All these games take an interactive approach to tell very down-to-earth human stories. No superheroes that rescue the world from a supervillain, but ordinary, relatable people with very common problems and stories that took a bad turn at some point in their lives. What I always found striking about these games is that everybody who played and enjoyed these games usually gives a very strong emotional response when one of those titles are mentioned in a discussion. I think this is mainly because, in contrast to most games, these titles, this genre of games, I tend to call it interactive experiences, focuses almost entirely on the narrative and the characters in them. I mean, think about it. When people talk, for example, about Final Fantasy VII, they mostly mention big moments like Aerith's demise and not the hours of grinding and combat put into it. Or when you talk about Mass Effect, people rarely tell you about how they shot 16 Cerberus soldiers in a row in that side mission, but they tell you about which characters they were romantically involved with and the moments where they had to decide about the fate of characters that they grew fond of. Games like Game of Thrones go down that same road, establishing a strong connection to the characters involved and making the player make meaningful decisions that he could end up regretting at a later point of the story. But here, this aspect is pretty much the entire game, with all the mechanical dead weight removed. every story requires something called suspension of disbelief from the player, viewer or reader. That means that he has to accept the alternate reality of the story, even though it's not completely in accordance with reality. A superhero movie, for example, can only work if the viewer accepts that Wolverine is practically invincible and can grow adamantium claws that cut through virtually anything, even though this is impossible in reality. In games, the player has to accept that he murders over 1,000 NPCs over the course of the story, because that's just how the game works. Many of those interactive experience games tackle very delicate topics that need to be approached with a certain amount of respect and dignity in order for them to be taken seriously. To achieve that, it really helps to lower that barrier of suspension of disbelief, especially since video games still somewhat carry that stigma of being just electronic toys in the eyes of many people. Games that move away from a lot of classic game mechanics really help changing the way lots of people perceive video games and the potential they have as a storytelling medium. The Walking Dead, for example, is at first sight a story about the zombie apocalypse, but true to the comics and the intention Robert Kirkman had in writing these stories, it's not a horror or an action story, but a tale of people in exceptionally difficult circumstances and how a lawless society can change the entire being of a person. And that is what Telltale's The Walking Dead completely focuses on. It's also literally the only game that I have played that handles the topic of parenthood in a good way. Your character becomes the father figure for a young girl that has lost her parents. And while there are a bunch of other games that involve children and taking care of them in some way, this is, at least in my experience, the only one where your protege never becomes a burden to you and is more than just an annoying, helpless quest giver. Just notice how, for example, the first time you meet Clementine, it's actually her that saves you, not the other way around. The way the story is written and presented gives the player a lot of room to really bond with that character, and by that to identify with the character you're playing, as your relationship towards Clementine is shaped by the way you interact with her. Or let's think of something even more intense. Imagine a game where you play the inmate of a death camp. To deal with such a topic as respectful as possible, it is crucial to reduce the story's suspension of disbelief to the lowest amount possible. Just imagine if such a game was filled with XP bars, stealth takedowns, because we need gameplay, and achievements around every corner. It would come over as a huge insult to the victims of the Holocaust. Well, alright, I don't say it's impossible. Wolfenstein: The New Order is a good example for that. But even this game tackled the topic only on a side note and very disjointed from actual historical events, as it was set in an over-the-top science fiction alternate universe scenario, and it was surprisingly well written, especially for a Wolfenstein game. Video games have shown that they have the capacity to handle topics like that, but they'd have to be very careful to choose the right approach and genre for it. Ever notice how not a single one of all the World War II shooters out there ever tackled the topic of concentration camps or the Holocaust? Only very few games ever dared to touch that topic, with one of the most notable examples being I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, which is a very dark and disturbing psychological horror adventure. And what do you know, it also features a very subtle but effective moral choice and decision system that tailors the outcome of the story. And that is what these no games are in a nutshell, a genre on their own. And don't get me wrong, I don't say that Telltale's latest gaming series are in any way perfect. They have their problems and faults, especially their heavy reliance on quick-time events, which can be very distracting and counterproductive at times, and often come over as a cheap excuse for interactivity. But not being a game is neither a problem, nor is it in any way a valid complaint. I'm personally very glad this genre has emerged, because it is a step forward that will have a significant impact on other genres in the future as well. Many of the stories that this young genre has brought forward already hold a place in the hearts of many players, and it has introduced lots of new people to video games and changed the way they perceive the medium as a whole, and that is a great achievement. If you don't like these games, that's fine, but why waste time asking pointless questions? Just stick to the genres you enjoy. I'm personally not at all into sports games, like for example racing games, because I honestly care more about a sack of rice that fell over in China than if Will Power or Scott Dick's son wins the next IndyCar race. Same goes for racing games, not my thing. But that doesn't make me start ranting about how racing games suck balls because you're only driving cars and you can't kill people with swords in them, because that's what I like in games and that's why that's not a game. Just a car driving software or whatever. That would be stupid, wouldn't it? Thank you so much for watching this video. The last couple of weeks have been super amazing for me, and I'd like to thank each one of you guys from the bottom of my heart for supporting me with what I'm doing with this channel. In such a short amount of time we've come so far already, and that's why I've decided to do something special.
Choose your destiny.
That's right, it's your turn now. You are going to choose the topic for a special episode that I've been wanting to do for a while now. It's not gonna be the next one, because that one's already been written, but probably the one after that. So, the question is, Vikings or Star Trek? Just click one of the images to vote. And if you want to see more videos, just click at the annotations below. I hope you all enjoyed this episode and I hope to see you in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching, keep on playing, and I'll see you next time on RagnarRox.